Everyone. Great to see you all. Wow, what a sea of faces. I feel like Tony Robbins. You see who we got there. See Carmel, see Chris Hallett, Tom there from the Netherlands. Who else we got? Helen. Yeah. And I can't actually see all of you because I can only see a maximum of 49 actual delegates on the screen at any one particular point in time. So if I haven't actually called you out, Elmer, how are you? Then please realize it's because I can't actually see you. So welcome to the first of 10 masterclasses. I quite often have late night ideas, you know, and I go, wow, that's a really great idea. And then I go and launch it and I discover that I'm the only person who actually thought it was a great idea. And nobody else responds. So I had this idea and I decided to put a post up on my profile on Facebook. And I then went to bed that night. And then the next morning, I think actually it was before I went to bed, I'd got something like 200 people said that they were in. So I thought, okay, we're going to do that then. And then very shortly after that, those numbers kept rising until this point in time, we had 800 people registered for this masterclass. And though we do know that some people can't actually make it, but we have upgraded our Zoom account so that if all 800 did actually show up, we would be able to let them all in. Andy Cooper, hi Andy. And so here we are. So this was my thinking about it. You know, I'm quite often asked a question over the 29 years now that I've been in the NLP business, and at 32 years I've been in the personal development business. I'm asked the question over that period of time, what's the most useful thing that you've learned? And I would say there's two answers to that. One of them, as a speaker, presenter, and trainer, I would say the single most important thing that I learned is the format system. And I know if you've done NLP trainers training or you've done something like Presenting Magically, then you'll know yourself just how useful that is as a speaker, presenter, and as a trainer. But then from a purely personal development, personal transformation point of view, I would say the single thing that I've learned, which has been the most useful, was a concept that I thought I was originally introduced to in 1993 by my original NLP trainer, mentor, and then very good friend, the late Dr. Tad James, which was this thing called perception is projection. But then when Ted introduced me to this idea of perception is projection, I then thought about an event which was probably a year to 18 months prior to that, which was a meeting that I had with one of my other mentors, or if you like, gurus for want of a better word, which was the late Stuart Wilde. And I'll tell you about that very interesting experience in weeks to come. But then I thought, in actual fact, somebody introduced me to this in 1990 when I set up my first business and was taught how to do selling by somebody called Max Helicar. And there was something, and I'll talk about what Max said in one of the later sessions that we've got, which is how we can apply perceptions projection into our business and into our career. So just a little bit of housekeeping. I can think all of you got your microphones muted, which is brilliant. Thank you. Though you've got your videos on, which is great because I like to be able to see these faces in front of me. And, you know, my perception of all of you is that you're absolutely amazing people, which is is a good thing from a perceptions projection point of view. Each of the sessions over the 10 weeks will be 30 minutes maximum, and that will include time at the end for Q&A. With this number of people that we've got on this particular call, I normally like to do Q&A by having people unmute their microphone and actually asking a question, but with this number of people, that's just not going to be possible. So what we'll do is we'll do Q&A. If questions come up, we'll do that through the chat feature, and then Sally's here, so she'll pass the questions on to me so that I can then answer them. For coming weeks, you can use the same link as you've used tonight or today, depending on where you are in the world, and that link will work for the entire 10-week series of this masterclass series. So this one really this week is like an intro to the concept of perceptions projection. Many of the people I can see here, I know you've already been introduced to perceptions projection because you've done trainings or events with me. But I also know that some people who are registered on this particular masterclass are new to me, they're new to the Performance Partnership, and so I don't know whether they know of perception is projection or know of perception is projection from my perception. So we're going to go through that right at the start and look at a number of things. So I was introduced to this concept, and it was introduced to me as being perceptions projection from the psychologist, or somebody who's taken as being one of the founders of psychotherapy, Carl Jung. And but in actual fact, the concept of perceptions projection predated Carl Jung, in that it appears in the Hermetic tradition, and it was referred to by Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great, as above, so below. And it's also in the Taoist tradition. In the Taoist tradition, it's referred to as in the microcosm, so in the macrocosm. So the microcosm is inside of you, is your inner world, and the macrocosm is the world outside of you. And in the Taoist tradition, it's saying, as in the microcosm, so the macrocosm, saying that basically what's inside is outside, and what's outside is inside. Now, we're going to be looking at this from how do we go about changing the outside world by becoming aware of what's inside, and then changing what's inside to change our perspective of the outside world. But if we looked at another tradition, which would be feng shui, feng shui takes as in the microcosm, so the macrocosm, the other way around, in that what they do is you change the outside world, and by changing the outside world, it changes the inside world. But it's the same principle. In quantum physics, it appears as the observer effect. As in quantum physics, we've got the idea that the observer actually changes what they are observing. So as soon as somebody actually observes something, you change it forever. So you'll never be aware of what the thing you're observing was before it enters your awareness and you start to observe it. So in these 10 sessions, we're going to be looking at a number of different aspects. It's actually in the guide, in the menu, as to what's going to be in each one of the 10 sessions. And this first one is about you and what are your perceptions, and therefore what are your projections. So what Carl Jung basically said, if we looked at it from a Jungian perspective, he said that basically all that anybody had of anybody else was a perception. And he said, and that perception actually is a projection from inside of you. I can't read that. Okay. If you just make sure, I've just got a note, if you could make sure that you've got your microphones muted. I think some some noise coming through on the session. So what Carl Jung said was that basically all that anybody had of anybody else, or in fact any event, is a perception of that person or that event. And that perception is your personal perception, and it's a projection that comes from inside of you. We've just had an example of perception as projection has just been happening over the last week or so with the Oscars and Will Smith slapping or hitting Chris Rock. And it's the same event. It's the same people. Yet there are so many different perceptions of those particular people and that particular event. You've got people saying that, Will Smith was absolutely out of order. He should have his Oscar taken away from him. And what he did was absolutely wrong. You've then got people going, actually, Will Smith was justified in doing what he did, even though violence isn't appropriate. And it was appropriate for him to protect his wife. And then you've got people saying that what Chris Rock did was out of order, that was wrong. And he crossed the line of comedy where he made a joke about somebody's health situation. And then you've got people going, it was all staged, it wasn't real, it was a set-up job. So there you go, a whole range of different perceptions for the same event. And you go, so who's right? Which perception is right? Well, you see, the thing with perception is projection is that it's a model. So in actual fact, this is why I say it was probably the most contentious, the most controversial masterclass I've ever done, because there are people who say that perception is projection isn't true, or they'll say it's wrong. And they'll say that there really is an objective reality. It's not only subjective and perception. You see, here's the thing with this. Perception is projection isn't real. It's a model. So it's neither right nor wrong, nor true, nor false. The question that we would ask about perception is projection is it useful? And in my experience over the last 29, 30 years since I learned it, it's probably one of the most valuable and useful things that I've used on a consistent basis. And it's a continual source for personal development, personal growth, and personal transformation. Because, I hear a lot of people say, oh yeah, perception is projection, I get that. I understand that, yeah. Which is actually an indication that you don't. Because, I've been using perception is projection for the last 29 years on a day-to-day basis in all areas of my life, and I still haven't got it. And I don't think, if you really, really take this to heart, I don't actually think you ever actually get to a point where you go, right, I've got that now. I think this is a personal development, personal transformation tool that you can probably use for the rest of your life. So one of the things that Carl Jung said was that whatever remains unconscious for you or unconscious about you, or what's in the content of your unconscious mind, unless you make it conscious, your unconscious will play out in your life, in your environment around you, and people will perceive it as fate. So what perception's projection is about making what's unconscious for you conscious, and using other people around you, other events around you as a means of discovering what's actually unconscious for you and making it conscious. You see, this is one of the major reasons why positive thinking doesn't work, because projection is unconscious. Perception's projection makes your unconscious projection conscious. But with positive thinking, I think what a lot of people do is they go, oh, I was just thinking negatively about that person. I was just thinking negatively about that situation. I was just thinking negatively about that particular event. I need to think positively about it. But think positively about it, as in conscious mind. But the projection is unconscious. Unless you change your unconscious projection, it will continue to play out in your life in some way, shape, or form. Yeah. So here's the thing with this. What it means is that your perception of a person around you can be no better or worse than your projection onto that person. Yeah. So let me say that again. Your perception of someone can be no better or worse than your projection onto that person. And I'm sure you've all had this experience at some point in time in your life where, maybe you're having a chat with somebody that you know pretty well, and you've got a mutual connection. And they're talking about this mutual connection. And what they're telling you or say about this person, there's absolutely no resemblance to the perception that you have. Even to the point where you might have gone and actually said to the person, are you sure we're talking about the same person? And it pans out, yes, you're talking about the same person, but it doesn't seem anything like your perception of that person. Well, it's the same person. It's a different projection. So what we're going to be looking at this week, and I'm going to give you a kind of like a weekly challenge to work on for a week before we get together the next week, is this one is about your perceptions. So you might have heard of the saying, when you point one finger out at somebody else, there's always three pointing back at you. Yeah. My sales teacher, Max Helikar, I mentioned, gave me a different version of this. And this is what we'll be talking about in a later session when we look at how do we use this concept in business or our career. In the sales training, he said, never speak badly about the competition, but it's because it always says more about you than it does about them. Yeah. Never speak badly about the competition because it always says more about you than it does about them. When you point one finger out at somebody else, there is always three fingers pointing back at you. Now, here's the thing that we can look at with this. So you might look out at a particular person or a particular category of person or a particular demographic, and you don't perceive that person to be totally healed, whole, and magnificent. So if you perceive anyone in your environment to not be totally healed, whole, and magnificent, then neither can you be. Yeah. So the people around us are like barometers to our projection. It's like the people around us, whether they're people that we know well, whether they're our partner in life, whether they're our family, whether they're our colleagues, or whether they're just a stranger walking down the street, are actually barometers for us. They tell us what we're projecting. It's almost like they're a blank screen, which then reflects back what we're projecting onto them. So here's the first thing I want you to think about. When you look at people around you in your environment, whether that's somebody that you meet, whether it's somebody that you bump into in a restaurant, whether it's the person who's serving you in the restaurant, whether it's fellow diners in the restaurant, whether it's somebody you see in your local pub when you're out for a drink, or whether it's somebody that you see as you're walking down the street. If you perceive that person or those people as not being totally healed, whole, and magnificent, that isn't you, that isn't them, that's you. See, most people don't realize that. which is why their projections remain unconscious. But what we're starting to do now is we're going, okay, that is a reflection of me. So it's an indication of where I'm not totally healed, whole, and magnificent. Therefore, what we can look at later on in the masterclass series, after we've done this for a few weeks, is then start to look at how do we go about changing our projections so that we change what we project onto other people around us. And therefore, we can change our perception of those people. And this doesn't actually need to be people that you are physically aware of. It could be a person that you come across in the newspapers, or something that you see on the TV, like the Will Smith and Chris Rock episode on the Oscars. They all tell you what you're projecting unconsciously. Now, the other thing with this as well is quite often when people talk about perceptions projection, they talk only about when you've got a perception of somebody not being totally healed, whole, and magnificent. But we project all of the content of our unconscious mind onto the people around us and people in our awareness. So including our unconscious projections, which are positive. So, quite often when I'm coaching my clients, one of those sessions quite often is I'll coach the clients around identifying some of their personal strengths or some of the things that they like about themselves or even admire in themselves. And quite often my client will say, I don't have any strengths. There's nothing really that I like about myself. There's nothing that I admire in myself. So then I'll say to them, well, is there the people around you? Are there people around you with strengths? Are there people around you with character traits that you admire? And they go, oh yes, there's lots of people with lots of strengths that I don't have. There's lots of things that people have that I admire that I don't have. But you see, because of perceptions projection, you wouldn't be able to perceive that in somebody else if it wasn't in you, but it's outside of your conscious awareness. So when you point one finger out at somebody else, there's always three pointing back at you. So if you go, I really love that about that person, you've got to remember there are three fingers pointing back at you. So this is really about bringing the content of your unconscious mind into your consciousness. So here's the, I'm going to take a little bit of time for Q&A. Let me just set up the this week's kind of challenge or this week's task for you. What I want you to notice is, what are the perceptions that you have for the people around you? As I say, whether it's people that you're actually meeting physically face to face, or whether it's people that you're meeting virtually face to face, like on Zoom, or whether it's people that you come across in your environment, in the newspapers, in the news, all of those kind of things. What are your perceptions of those people, both positive perceptions and negative perceptions? And then begin to notice how that's actually you. Yeah, how that's actually you. You're not actually going to do anything with it at the moment. This is the first part of the process, is using perception as projection to become consciously aware of our previously unconscious projections. Yeah, so that's the task for this week, to start bringing that into your awareness. Have we got some questions? Questions and comments. Okay, let me have a look. Okay, so Andrew Donovan, is this similar to Zero Limits book by Hugh Len? Actually, it was also Joe Vitale. It's actually very similar, Andrew, sort of similar concept, because what Hugh Len was talking about, and also Joe Vitale, is a Hawaiian huna process called Ho'oponopono. And Ho'oponopono is going to be one of the processes we're going to look at later in this masterclass series, that is a way that enables us to be able to heal up our projections on other people, so that then our perception of them changes. The process actually in the Zero Limits book is the Ho'oponopono prayer, which actually isn't the original huna Ho'oponopono. So I'm going to talk to you about the real Hawaiian huna Ho'oponopono, rather than the version publicized and made very popular by Hugh Len and Joe Vitale. And also, Andrew, yes, the Aborigines believe you see the world into existence, which is an interesting concept, because, you know, when you go to sleep at night, where does the world go? Well, it disappears, and then it comes back when you wake up. But where did it go whilst you're asleep? And you see, what most people don't realize is that they have the potential to change the world in their perception, but they don't. So they keep waking up to the same world every day. But what we can do is we can create a new world into a new realization. So as Marcia, I think, are you saying that projection is the unconscious part? Yes. So everybody projects onto everybody and everything, but they're not consciously aware that they're doing it. So they actually believe this person is like this person isn't like that. So the projection is unconscious, and because they don't get perception as projection, it remains unconscious for them. And therefore, they don't have the ability to be able to then consciously change it if it's not useful or it's not enabling them to get the result that they want. Yeah. Right, Robin Lockhart. I'm hearing we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. Yes, correct. Which, you know, from an NLP point of view, because I know many of you have studied NLP, and you know the NLP communications model, then, you know, you've got the external event, but then we all filter those events through the process of deletion, distortion, and generalization, which is unique to us before we create our internal representation inside. And we can only experience our internal representation of the world, not the world itself. So therefore, you know, what we've got in NLP, presupposition of NLP, everybody has their own unique model of the world, as in their experience of it is unique to them. But again, the majority of people aren't aware of that. So they believe that everybody's experience of the world is the same as theirs. But in actual fact, it's not, you know. Okay, what else have we got? Keith Haynes, if we never get perceptions projection, how do we know when we are healed, whole, and magnificent? Good question, Keith. When you are totally healed, whole, and magnificent, everybody and everything in your world will be totally healed, whole, and magnificent in your perception. Then you'll know I'm done. And then we can pop off somewhere else. It's interesting. I've got a friend of mine. He might actually be on the session, Alan Cleenans, And he's got this particular thing that he would kind of like put this as being like peeling the layers off an onion. And you just think you've got it, and then something happens and you go, okay, I haven't got it, I need to do some more work on myself. And there was one of his clients said, Alan, what happens when you finish peeling off all the layers of the onion? And Alan said, you die. And then his client said, and what happens then? He says, you come back as another onion. As in, this is a continual process. Yeah, Romola, how does thinking negative of someone like Putin say about oneself? So your perception of Putin is a projection of yours. Because, the interesting one is, I've got a number of clients who are, they're Russian and they live in Russia. And the news that is given to them in Russia is totally different than the news that we get in Europe. Yeah. And, when I've been teaching some of my higher level HUNA students this particular concept, they will go, when I was teaching in the States, they would say to me, okay, David, I totally agree with perception is projection, except it doesn't work with Donald Trump. He genuinely is an idiot. So you don't get to play that game, unfortunately. Perception is projection is black and white. It's not like perception is projection works with everybody except this particular person. So yeah, then, the thing to do would be to go, and this is one of the things to do this week, and then we'll talk more about it next week when we get together, is that, yeah, what your feelings and your thinkings about somebody like Putin or somebody like Donald Trump or somebody like President Biden or somebody like Boris Johnson is you. Now, as soon as you get that, then you realize that you've got some work to do. Well, that's certainly what I realized, yeah. So Dusty, if I believe someone or something to be truly evil, should that be the cause for concern for me and lies within my own subconscious mind? Yes, well, not a cause for concern. I would say an opportunity for development and for personal transformation. It's interesting that, if you look at root languages, the most ancient languages on the planet, there is no word in that language, in those languages, for sin. There's no word in those languages for the devil, or any of those kind of things, which means if there wasn't a word for those things, then it didn't exist in those people's experience. So those kind of things are actually quite a modern invention, if you like. What if you, so this is Leo, what if you compare yourself to others, as in they're slimmer, prettier, more successful? Is that you too? Yes, it is. So, one of those things that perception's projection can bring to the surface, and we'll look more at this as we go through, is perception's projection can and will bring up negative emotions. and can and will bring up what we might call limiting beliefs. And we'll look at how we can go about changing those things. Is perception conscious or unconscious when projection is unconscious? So what we've got here is projection is an unconscious process. We're projecting the unconscious. Most people are unconscious of the fact that they're actually projecting. Whereas what we're doing is we're unconsciously projecting, but using the concept of perception's projection, making our projections conscious. So that then we can actually, then if we want to, learn to change our projections, but we need to make our projections conscious first. Right, Tara, how does this operate in imposter syndrome, where a person is afraid to be found out that they are a fraud? How this would play out, I had a particular client who came to see me for fear of presenting. But when we looked at it a little bit more detail, actually, he had the same kind of fears and anxieties come up whenever he was visible. And what basically came out of that was that he had a limiting belief about himself, that it was, this isn't what it was. It was, I can't actually remember what the limiting belief was that he had, but it was something like, I'm a bad person. And so the reason why he was anxious, the reason why he felt afraid, was he was worried that if he got in front of an audience, people would realize he was a bad person. Now, as soon as we used timeline therapy to actually get rid of that limiting belief, he didn't need to hide that anymore. So therefore, what you've labeled here as imposter syndrome actually disappeared for him. Oh, I think we've got time for one more. Sorry. Okay, people are asking for record. Oh, this is from you. Okay. People are asking for recordings as can't take notes quick enough. Okay, I shall take that as my perception that I am speaking too fast and therefore slow down. We are looking at being able to make recordings available, and what's the best mechanism for that? Okay, so what we're going to do is, for all the people who are actually here on this session, then what we'll do is once we've got the video produced, then we'll actually upload that and email you a link so that you can watch it again. Yeah, great. Well, thanks for joining me. It's great to see the people in front. Was that? Give me a thumbs up if that was a valuable session. Great, thank you. So I'm projecting the right thing. And we will be back here again, same bat time, same bat channel, next Wednesday, wherever you are in the world, and we'll then be doing part 2, which is then, what do we do about other people's projections onto us? Yeah, as in, what are other people's projections on us, or if you like, what is it about other people's opinions of us? Okay, that's what we're going to cover next week. So great to see you all, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you all again next week. See you guys.